there were a lot of conspiracy theories already flowing, trying to explain why it is that Kari Lake lost. Some of them are not necessarily as nuanced and intelligent as others. So here is something that's going around. As of when I clipped it out, it had 7,000 retweets. This is from a woman who says, flashback. Fox 10 accidentally releases early graphics showing Katie Hobbs winning over 2 weeks before the election. So what they have is a local Fox affiliate having like a test of their election day visualization software. And they are saying this is proof that the race was going to be stolen because they already have the graphics ready. And I have a couple of problems with that. Now, others are accepting this whole cloth. Del Nichols says the fix was in a long time ago. Now we know why Hobbs didn't have to debate. The new sheriff in town says they always tell you what they're gonna do before they pull it off. Well, first of all, why would they always tell you that? That seems like a great way to undercut their efforts to take the election from you, new sheriff. Also, this was accidentally leaked. You're making it seem as if it's an intentional thing. Why did they accidentally leak it? But that's of course not the significant issue. I have more significant issues. First of all, with the concept that if you were going to steal an election, you'd loop in the local Fox affiliates. Why would you do that? What part of stealing an election would be getting every individual news network on board? Why would you need to do that? You could just steal it and then they would have to report that result. It's not like the individual news networks are going through the votes themselves. That's all centralized, apparently in a place that you're stealing the election. So that seems a little bit weird. Also, by the way, if they previewed 2 weeks ago how she was gonna win, why did they show a graphic with her winning 53-47 when it looks like it's not even gonna be 51-49? So again, the result not being close to what is on the graphic is not convincing these literal thousands of people who are retweeting this. And beyond that, how do they think these graphic packages work? Why would they bake it in before the election rather than just making it the day of? They clearly have the capacity to do that. They do that for sports, they do that for weather, they do that for politics. How could this possibly convince so many people, especially once you add on that if we're gonna go to all the trouble of stealing these elections, specifically in Arizona, why is it that they allowed so many Republicans to win congressional races in Arizona, including very close races? This Siscomani race was within 1 point. You've got Schweiker winning by less than 1 point. Why not steal those two? Why is it that none of this gets through to these conspiracy theorists? Why, for instance, did they manage to steal the gubernatorial race, but they allowed the Republicans to maintain control of both houses of the state legislature? Why does none of this get through to these people? Why don't conspiracy theories at least have to be at least a relatively well developed with a little bit of something that could pass for evidence, at least at first glance? I don't know, Jessica, what do you think?
I mean, I would point to our education system being terrible and critical thinking not being something that's taught in public schools. This is something we say a lot, but it's huge because if elections were being rigged and stolen, don't you think that the election, the candidates would be more different? Like in the United States, we have people like Kari Lake running against people like, Hobbs, which is a race where Kari Lake is an extremist and a fascist, right? So there is a difference there, but when you think about what these candidates typically get done once they're in public office, it's far more interesting that you see these people govern on behalf of corporations and take a bunch of money from corporations. Like nobody needs to rig elections because so many people who get into public office in the United States are doing the same exact thing, but for some reason, it's more interesting to pretend like these elections are two teams against each other that hate each other very much, are very different, and are not gonna govern similarly at all, which they do. They all govern on behalf of corporations. Like that's a much more interesting conspiracy theory than maybe they're rigging our elections and we have such low turnout. Like we don't have 100% turnout anyway. Like they control so much of the narrative. They don't need to rig the elections. Like it's just so insane that this is what they're so hyper focused on. And the evidence that they use to point to election rigging is just minuscule. Like there's a greater chance of getting struck by lightning than having voter fraud in the United States. Like they don't need to rig elections. They control the entire political process.
Wait, are you claiming that they control the lightning? You're totally right. And the gap between your hypothetical like explanation for what's really going on, the one that they fall to produces like Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson. These are people who claim to be revealing the elite like levers of control. They're incredibly wealthy people. Trump is a literal billionaire, and you're trusting him to be the one that's gonna take down this system. It's an amazing con to make them think that they're draining the swamp when they're sending the toads back into the swamp. They're maintaining control of the toads. And that's just within the Republican Party. As you point out, obviously on economic matters, there's far too little difference between the vast majority of centrist Democrats and every Republican anyway. But it's just like, if you're gonna have a country that's predisposed to try to look for patterns that explain these things, could we at least accidentally have some people who land on the actual one? I think it's pretty exciting. I think it's interesting, as you sketched out. I think it's a pretty exciting one. These people clearly want to be entertained. Why isn't that enough for them? But anyway, sorry, final thoughts go to you.
No, it's a good point. They want to be entertained, but they don't care that these people get into office and govern just like everybody else, govern like neoliberals. Even people like Donald Trump, people like Kari Lake, they say terrible things and foment all kinds of fear in the country. But the actual policies and legislation they pursue are not that different from establishment Democrats. And that's the one thing that like mainstream media isn't telling that story. That's not on Facebook. People just aren't getting that information. And so they believe things like this instead.
Yeah. And look, I think at least to the short-term credit of Democrats, they seemed to get the concept in the months leading up to the election that they have to differentiate themselves a little bit. So passing the climate bill, while much smaller than any climate bill that I would have been involved in the writing of, the student debt cancellation, obviously smaller than either you or I would have done, but those are both things that never would have gotten through a Republican-controlled legislature, or pushed by a Republican president. So hopefully Biden and the Democrats see that and think, hey, if it worked then, maybe we could do it a couple more times. Maybe it would continue to help our party.
Yeah, I think it would have been a red wave without those things.
Yeah, and by the way, I know that we have to move on, but can I just briefly mention, I saw an op-ed going around, I don't know if you saw this too. It's like Dems consider how to make a John Fetterman 2.0. Like, how are we gonna do this again? And I read that, and to my discredit, I didn't read the article. I just read the headline, and I thought, I know what they're gonna say. It's gonna be about the hoodies, or it's gonna be about getting a big guy or something. It's not gonna be about economic populism or anything. Because I got news for you. You had an earlier Fetterman, granted he was smaller, didn't have the upper body strength, but Bernie already ran for president multiple times on the same pattern, not on all the same issues, but even more progressive. But that is already a path that has been staked out that would be wildly successful if you stopped undercutting it during every presidential primary.
That's exactly right. Bernie would have won against Donald Trump in 2016, but instead they decided to undercut his bid.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.